The first dead calf turned up on a Tuesday morning in March of 1947, lying stiff in the corner of Ed Morrison's barn, just 3 miles down the county road. By Wednesday, he had lost 2 more. By Friday, the veterinarian from town confirmed what every farmer in Creek County, Oklahoma already feared in their bones. Shipping fever had arrived, and it was spreading fast. Tom Brennan heard the news while loading feed sacks at Henderson's General Store. He was 32 years old, had a wife, 2 young daughters, and 48 head of cattle that represented every dollar his family had in the world. His father had lost half their herd to blackleg back in 1931, and Tom still remembered the hollow look in the old man's eyes as they dragged carcass after carcass to the burning pit. That memory made his hands shake as he hefted the last sack into his truck. "Ed Morrison's selling out," old Frank Henderson said from behind the counter, not looking up from his ledger. "Lost 11 calves in 5 days. Bank won't extend his note." Tom didn't respond. He paid for his feed, climbed into his truck and drove home faster than he should have on those dirt roads. The dust cloud behind him hung in the cold March air like smoke from a signal fire, warning of disaster. His barn sat on a small rise above the house, a solid structure his grandfather had built from oak timber in 1898. Tom had spent every morning and evening of his life in that barn, and he knew every beam, every stall, every shadow. But that afternoon, he saw it differently. He saw it as a battlefield where he would either save his family or lose everything. The cattle were in the east pasture, healthy and unaware. Tom stood in the barn doorway and ran through everything his father had taught him about livestock disease. Shipping fever, what the veterinarians called bovine respiratory disease, spread through contact, through shared water, through the very air animals breathed in close quarters. It killed fast. It killed young stock faster. And it showed no mercy to farmers who didn't know how to fight it. Tom walked to the small room at the back of the barn where his father had always kept supplies. On a rough wooden shelf, next to the liniment and the copper sulfate, sat 3 bars of hard yellow soap. Not the fancy perfumed kind his wife Martha used in the house. This was lye soap, the kind his grandmother had made in an iron pot every autumn, mixing rendered fat with wood ash lye until it became something that could strip dirt from anything it touched. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Soap isn't just for getting clean, son. It's for staying alive." Tom carried the soap to the workbench and set it down next to a bucket. Then he walked back to the house and told Martha they were going into quarantine protocol starting immediately. No visitors, no borrowed tools, no cattle leaving the property. The girls couldn't go to school. Martha couldn't go to church. They were cutting themselves off from the community because the community had become dangerous. Martha's face went pale, but she didn't argue. She had grown up on a farm too. She knew what an outbreak could do. That evening, while the sun set red over the prairie, Tom began the routine that would consume every moment of the next 3 weeks. He filled a bucket with well water and shaved soap into it until the water turned cloudy and slick. He dipped a rag into the solution and washed down every surface in the barn, every stall partition, every feed trough, every water bucket. The soap cut through the winter's accumulation of grime and manure and dust, leaving the wood dark and clean. His hands burned from the lye. His shoulders ached from the scrubbing. But he didn't stop. When the barn was clean, he moved to the equipment. Every halter got washed, every lead rope, every tool that might touch an animal. He hung them to dry in the cold night air, while the soap solution dripped onto the barn floor. By midnight, he had used half a bar of soap. By morning, his hands were cracked and bleeding from the lye, but the barn smelled different. It smelled like defense, like resistance, like a man refusing to surrender. The next day, Tom drove to Henderson's store and bought every bar of lye soap Frank had in stock, 14 bars. Frank didn't ask questions. He just wrapped them in brown paper and wished Tom luck. On the way home, Tom saw smoke rising from Ed Morrison's place. They were burning the dead stock. The wind was blowing from the west, carrying the smell of burning hair and flesh across the prairie. Tom drove with his windows up, but the smell got in anyway. At home, he gathered his daughters and explained what they needed to do. 7-year-old Annie and 5-year-old Beth listened with wide eyes as their father described the new rules. Before they fed the cattle, they would wash their hands with soap for exactly 60 seconds. Tom counted it out loud to show them how long that was. After they fed the cattle, they would wash again. If they touched a cow, washed. If they touched the barn, washed. If they even walked near the cattle, washed. "Why so much washing, Daddy?" Beth asked. "Because germs are smaller than anything you can see," Tom explained, kneeling to her level. "They hide on your hands, on your clothes, on everything you touch. But soap is like a soldier that fights them. When you wash with soap, you're killing the germs before they can hurt our cows." It was a simple explanation, but it was true. Tom's father had learned it from a cattle inspector during a tuberculosis outbreak in 1928. The inspector had explained how soap molecules grabbed onto both water and grease, pulling bacteria and viruses away from surfaces and skin, rendering them harmless. Most farmers in 1947 didn't understand the science, but they understood the results. Annie took the lesson seriously. She appointed herself the soap guardian, responsible for making sure everyone followed the washing protocol. She kept a bar of soap next to the water pump outside the barn and timed everyone's washing with the single-minded determination of a child given an important job. By the end of the first week, 3 more farms in Creek County had reported sick cattle. The veterinarian was overwhelmed. The rendering truck that hauled away dead stock was making rounds every other day. At church on Sunday, which only Martha attended, leaving Tom and the girls in quarantine, the congregation prayed for God to spare their herds. Tom didn't go to church. He stayed home and washed the barn again. The soap protocol expanded. Every morning, Tom created a fresh bucket of soap solution. He dipped his boots in it before entering the barn. He washed his hands before touching each animal. When he milked the 2 dairy cows that provided milk for his family, he washed their udders with the soap solution before attaching the milking apparatus, then washed them again afterward. This wasn't just cleanliness. This was warfare. The extra work added 2 hours to every morning and 2 hours to every evening. Tom's hands became so raw that Martha had to bandage them at night. But he noticed something that kept him going. His cattle stayed healthy. While Ed Morrison was selling out and the Jacobson place had lost 8 head and the Patterson farm was under quarantine from the county health inspector, Tom's 48 head of cattle remained alert, active and disease-free. In the second week, Tom's neighbor Ray Sutton came by asking to borrow a hay rake. Ray's own rake had broken, and he needed to move hay before rain arrived. It was a simple request the kind neighbors honored without question in rural Oklahoma. Tom said no. Ray's face hardened. "We've been neighbors for 12 years, Tom. And I want to keep you as a neighbor," Tom replied, standing his ground. "But your cattle are too close to the Patterson place. If one of your cows is incubating shipping fever and you touch her, then touch my equipment. You could carry it here. I can't risk that. You saying my cows are sick? I'm saying I don't know, and neither do you. The incubation period is 4 to 7 days. An animal can carry the disease before showing symptoms. I'm not taking chances." Ray left angry. Tom felt the weight of it, the way you feel the weight of breaking an unwritten rule. But he also knew that sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every piece of equipment that left his property and returned was a potential vector for disease. The soap protocol meant nothing if he allowed contamination to walk right through his gate. 2 days later, Ray Sutton's cattle started showing symptoms. The disease moved through Ray's herd like fire through dry grass. Within a week, he had lost 19 head. The veterinarian could barely keep up with the death certificates. Ray's wife stopped coming to church. The curtains in their farmhouse stayed drawn. Tom heard the news from Martha and felt no satisfaction, only a grim confirmation that he had made the right choice. He doubled down on his soap protocol. He began washing the cattle themselves, using the soap solution to clean their faces, their nostrils, anywhere bacteria might enter. The cattle didn't enjoy it, but they tolerated it because Tom was gentle and because the soap solution was mixed weak enough not to burn their skin. Annie helped with the younger calves, carefully wiping their faces with soapy rags while singing songs to keep them calm. She took to the work naturally, understanding in her child's way that she was protecting creatures that couldn't protect themselves. In the third week, the county agricultural agent came by. His name was Harold Sims, and he had the exhausted look of a man who had seen too many dead animals. He stood in Tom's yard and asked permission to inspect the herd. I've heard you haven't had any losses, Harold said. That's unusual. I need to verify you're not hiding sick stock. Tom understood the implication and didn't take offense. In an outbreak, everyone was suspect. He led Harold through the property, showing him every animal. Harold examined them carefully, checking eyes, checking temperatures, checking for the telltale signs of respiratory distress. They're healthy, Harold finally admitted. All of them. How are you managing it? Tom showed him the soap. Harold picked up one of the yellow bars, turning it over in his hands like it was a foreign artifact. You're telling me that soap is keeping your cattle alive while everyone else is losing their herds. Not just soap, Tom explained. Protocol. Every surface gets washed every day. Every tool gets washed between uses. Hands get washed constantly. No outside contact, no shared equipment. The soap is just the weapon. The protocol is the strategy. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a small notebook and started taking notes. Show me exactly what you do. Tom walked Harold through the entire routine, the daily barn washing, the boot dipping, the hand washing intervals, the cleaning of feed troughs and water buckets, the isolation procedures. Harold wrote it all down, his pencil scratching across the paper in the quiet barn. Your father teach you this? Harold asked. Most of it. The rest I figured out from common sense. Germs spread through contact. Soap kills germs. Eliminate contact, apply soap, stay alive. It's more sophisticated than what most farmers are doing, Harold said. Most guys are just hoping prayer and luck will carry them through. Prayer and luck don't clean bacteria off a water bucket, Tom replied. Harold nodded slowly. I'm going to recommend this protocol to other farmers. Would you be willing to demonstrate it? Tom thought about Ray Sutton's angry face when he had refused to loan the hay rake. He thought about the whispers that probably circulated about the Brennan family hiding from their neighbors, too proud or too scared to show their faces. He thought about the cost of breaking with community expectations. Then he thought about his 48 healthy cattle, about his daughters who still had a home, about Martha who could still sleep at night without the sound of her husband digging burial pits for dead stock. I'll demonstrate it, Tom said. The demonstration happened on a Saturday morning at the county fairgrounds. Harold had put out word through the Agricultural Extension Office that Tom Brennan would be showing disease prevention techniques. 23 farmers showed up, which was about 15 fewer than Harold had hoped for, but 8 more than Tom had expected. Tom brought his soap, his buckets, and his equipment. He set up in one of the livestock barns and walked the farmers through every step of the protocol. He showed them how to mix the soap solution to the right strength, strong enough to kill bacteria, but weak enough not to damage skin or equipment. He demonstrated the hand-washing technique, counting out the full 60 seconds while some of the younger farmers shifted impatiently. He explained the isolation procedures, the boot dipping, the daily cleaning routine. He talked about incubation periods and disease vectors, and the importance of preventing contact between potentially infected animals and clean herds. Some of the farmers listened intently, taking notes. Others stood with their arms crossed, skeptical that something as simple as soap could make a difference. One older farmer, Gene Wallace, spoke up from the back of the group. My daddy farmed for 50 years and never washed his barn with soap, Gene said. Lost stock sometimes, sure, but that's farming. You're making it sound like we can control nature and we can't. Tom looked at Gene, understanding the resistance. These were men who had been farming the same way their fathers and grandfathers had farmed. Change felt like criticism. New methods felt like an insult to tradition. You're right that we can't control nature, Tom replied, but we can control how we respond to it. Shipping fever is nature, but the way it spreads from one animal to another, from one farm to another, that's something we have a say in. The soap doesn't stop the disease from existing, it stops it from spreading to your animals. How many head have you lost? Harold Sims asked Gene. Gene's jaw tightened. 16. And you, Tom? None. The number hung in the air of the livestock barn like a verdict. 16 versus 0. Traditional methods versus soap protocol. The math was brutal and undeniable. I'll try it, said a younger farmer named Robert Chen. His family had immigrated from China in 1938 and bought a small place north of town. Robert was hungry to learn, unencumbered by tradition. What kind of soap do I need? Tom spent the next hour answering questions, demonstrating techniques, and distributing information. Harold Sims promised to print up instruction sheets through the extension office. Some farmers stayed and talked. Others left without saying goodbye, unwilling to admit they might need to change their methods. Gene Wallace left with the skeptics. 2 weeks later, his remaining cattle started showing symptoms. By the end of the month, Gene had lost his entire herd. The bank foreclosed on his farm in early May. Tom heard he moved to Tulsa to find factory work, joining the thousands of displaced farmers who couldn't compete with disease and debt and the changing economics of agriculture. Tom felt sorry for Gene, but he didn't feel guilty. He had offered the knowledge freely. Some men accepted it, some didn't. That was their choice to make. Robert Chen accepted it. He implemented the SOAP protocol on his farm with the same meticulous attention to detail that his family brought to everything they did. His cattle stayed healthy. By summer, Robert was demonstrating the protocol to other immigrant farming families who faced extra scrutiny and extra pressure to prove themselves in rural Oklahoma. The outbreak burned itself out by late April. 47 farms in Creek County had reported losses. 12 families sold out completely. The economic damage rippled through the community for years. Equipment dealers went out of business, feed stores closed. The livestock auction saw reduced numbers that depressed prices for everyone. But Tom Brennan's farm came through intact. All 48 head of cattle survived. Martha's garden flourished that spring, fed by her relief and gratitude. Annie and Beth talked about the outbreak for years, remembering the importance their father had placed on soap and washing and following the protocol exactly. Tom kept soap in his barn for the rest of his farming career. It became a permanent part of his routine, integrated into the daily work as naturally as feeding and watering. When he eventually taught his own son to farm in the 1960s, the soap lesson came early and was reinforced constantly. "Why do we keep soap in the barn, Dad?" his son asked, when he was about the same age Beth had been during the outbreak. "Because germs don't take weekends off," Tom replied. "Because clean equipment means healthy animals. Because an ounce of prevention beats a pound of cure every single time. And because in 1947, this soap saved our family when a lot of other families lost everything." The practice spread beyond Tom's farm. Harold Sims incorporated the SOAP protocol into official agricultural extension recommendations. Veterinary colleges began teaching it to their students. Feed stores started stocking lye soap specifically for barn use, advertising it as essential disease prevention equipment. By the 1960s, most progressive farmers kept soap in their barns as standard practice. The younger generation accepted it without question, never knowing there had been a time when it was considered radical or unnecessary. They didn't remember the outbreaks of the 30s and 40s, didn't remember the desperation of watching healthy animals sicken and die while you stood helpless. But the old farmers remembered. They remembered the smell of burning carcasses. They remembered the foreclosure notices. They remembered neighbors who lost everything, because they didn't know that something as simple as soap could mean the difference between survival and ruin. Tom Brennan farmed until 1973, when arthritis finally forced him to sell his herd and lease his pastures to a younger man. On his last day of active farming at 68 years old, he walked through his barn one final time. The soap was still there on the shelf, yellow and hard and ready, same as it had been for 26 years. He picked up a bar and held it in his scarred, work-worn hands. It was just soap, fat and lye mixed together until they became something greater than their parts. But it represented something more important than cleanliness. It represented the knowledge that human beings weren't helpless against nature's threats. They could think, they could plan, they could use simple tools in systematic ways to protect what they had built. The soap had saved his farm. But more than that, it had saved his dignity. It had allowed him to meet disaster with action instead of resignation. It had given him control in a profession where control was rare and precious. Tom set the soap back on the shelf and walked out of the barn, leaving it for whatever farmer came next. The knowledge would continue. The protocol would continue. The soap would remain in the barn, ready for the next fight, the next outbreak, the next moment, when preparation meant the difference between survival and loss. That's why old farmers kept soap in the barn, not because they were particularly clean or particularly cautious, but because they had learned through hard experience that the simplest tools applied with discipline and understanding could defeat threats that seemed overwhelming. They had learned that in farming, as in life, survival often came down to small daily acts of prevention rather than dramatic gestures of cure. The soap was always there, yellow and hard and waiting, a silent testament to the fact that knowledge mattered, that method mattered, that taking the time to do things right could mean everything when disease came calling across the prairie wind. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found this story valuable, please subscribe to our channel for more documentaries about American agricultural heritage and the practical wisdom of old-time farmers. Hit that like button and share this with anyone who appreciates the hard-won knowledge of rural America. Your support helps us preserve these important stories. This video is inspired by real events and is not meant to represent or offend anyone. Tom Brennan is a representative character who reflects the real experiences of hundreds of American farmers who faced similar situations during the outbreak years of the 1930s through 1970s. The soap protocols and disease prevention methods described are based on actual agricultural practices, documented by county extension offices and veterinary records from that era.